how much money do we owe to U.S. Customs? And the duty rates, as we know, they are determined by what? By a number of factors. One of them is harmonized tariff schedule of the United States. This guy. Another one is the date. So if you have to pay government money, let's say you know that the duty rate is 10%. Well, what if it changes on it's 10% on day 1, it changes to 5% on day 2. And you bring it on the midnight, right in the middle of the point between day 1 and day 2. What happens? Do you pay 5% or 10%? And how do you cause the dutiable rate to be 5% as opposed to 10% if you can at all? So those are the questions that we're going to deal with today. Let's see how customs quizzes you on this one. Let's see what kind of situation they want to know. So it's a relatively short question, a statement where we need to fill in the blank. The entry documentation 3461 rule of 5 is filed in proper form without entry summary, so you don't pay duties, the situation that we discussed. At the time of entry, the time of entry is when blank. So let's go one by one. When appropriate, CBP officer authorizes examination of merchandise covered by documentation. Why is that incorrect? Why do you think that's incorrect? The first one. What's wrong with this one? Buzzwords. Release versus examination, right? So you have to have release of merchandise. Not examination is not a release. Examination is merely inquiry of what type of things you are bringing. So by itself, it's not sufficient. Here, officer, the first situation, authorizes the release of merchandise covered by entry documentation. That's good enough. Next, 61. CBP form 7501 must be filed 10 working days after the time of entry or date of entry. So if this is filed on day 1, but the date of entry is on day 31, this means that it means that it is 31 plus 10 working days. That's when you need to file this one, the latest. That's the whole idea. So the entry summary with duties should be filed within 10 working days after the time of entry. And of course there were exceptions, right? We talked about exception if this one is rejected on day 10, then you have 2 more working days to refile it. Filed. When can you file 7501? What are the circumstances? Can you file before the entry? So you can file before merchandise arrives. But if you do that, customs will not take your money. Customs will treat it as preliminary review. If it's filed after at the time or after, so let me use this, at or after arrival, then so long as you do your work correctly, you fill out your fields correctly, and you pay money, that would be the time of entry. So the act of filing is the time of entry. Next one, we move to quota, our favorite one, because there is all sorts of exceptions to quota merchandise. So quota merchandise, just like with certain exceptions, where have we seen exceptions? Everyone recalls the multiple merchandise per entry and incremental release situations, that if it's quota merchandise, you cannot release it incrementally. There was an exception for that. Remember those? So here we see another exception. Entry summary. So time of entry for quota merchandise. So the time of entry often will be the time when you pay the duties, because the nature of the quota is designed in order to limit the to make sure that only limited quantities come into the country. It is kind of like a trade barrier, and because trade barrier for, and what type of merchandise we usually have quota nowadays for? Cigarettes. I'm not sure about that one. We know we have taxes, the federal taxes for cigarettes. It depends, I guess, which one. There was a I know that United States 6 months ago, or maybe even more, they lost a case in a World Trade Organization to, I believe, Indonesia or Philippines, because they restricted certain type of cigarettes. So I guess the question will be what type of cigarettes. But if you look at more broadly, right, without opening up the HTS, of course, you have to look in the HTS to find out. But without opening the HTS, if you deal with agricultural unprocessed commodities, so if you deal with raw sugar, if you deal with cheese, if you deal with milk products, then you're likely to encounter quota restrictions. 141.61, this is what we're discussing. But the rates of duty will depend on the circumstances. Normally, the duty rates applicable to the merchandise shall be the rates at the effect of time of entry. Does everyone see? Time of entry equals the rates of duty. Everyone sees this? But immediate transportation has a separate carve-out provision, which says that unless it's quota merchandise, so if it's quota, I take it back, and which is covered by an entry for immediate transportation, if entering for consumption in the port designated by consignee his ancient without having been taken, shall be the most important, the effect, the duty, subject to the rates in effect on merchandise transportation entry was accepted at the port of original destination. So here we have time of entry equals duty rates. Here we have time of 7501 entry. So here we have two entries. One 7501 entry, IT entry, and two consumption entry. Everyone follows this. When you file immediate transportation, it's called an entry. You enter it for immediate transportation. That's one entry number one. Number two, then you file what's called entry for consumption. That's entry number two. Here, see this immediate transportation entry. It tracks back to that. But see, again, if it's quota, then the date of entry is when you file 75.1 with estimated duties attached.